Hi, let's talk about asking effective questions in the classroom. You might think, why is it important to think about that? Well, obviously questions are natural in everyday communication, but they're also a really important teaching tool. And so it's really important to consider how you use it in the classroom to get the most out of what you want to achieve. Teachers use questions for lots of different reasons, including classroom management, getting the learners involved in the lesson and helping them to understand what they should have learned. If we don't use them effectively, learners can get confused. They might misunderstand what you're doing or what they're learning. They could become disengaged. They could lose motivation to learn. So it's really important that we get it right. Obviously, some questions come up in the classroom naturally based on what a learner has said or what they ask, but a large number of questions that you use should be well thought out in order that they get the maximum benefit from their learning experience. So, things that you need to consider. Firstly, is the type of question that you're asking. So, are you asking questions to check what they already know or have understood from your teaching? If so, you might ask questions like these, concept check questions, like what does X mean? When do we use it? What comes after it? And so on. Really short answers, and you've got a specific answer in mind that you want them to give you. Ask them questions in order to get information from learners, an opinion, or to clarify something, in which case you would ask more open-ended questions like, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? Have you ever done something? What kind of, you're trying to get more out from them. Other things to consider are the purpose of questions. So why you're asking a question. So you might use questions when you're brainstorming a topic during the lead-in process. You might be trying to elicit what they already know, or you might be guiding them to look at patterns or rules in a text or in examples that you've put on the board. You might be concept checking their understanding before you practice it. It could be as a question and answer activity, which could be a full class activity, or it could be in pairs or small groups where they ask each other questions and answer them. It might be follow-up questions, so they've answered something, but you want more detail, so you're asking for more information. You might be asking them questions on strategies in building their skills, like how do you know the reader feels this way? Or where in the text can you see whatever it is? It could be giving students feedback on tasks or activities, or getting feedback from learners about how they felt they did in an activity or how difficult they found it. You could be just expressing an interest in learners and just chatting to them, what they did at the weekend, or if they've shared something in class, you might want to know a little bit more about it, just out of curiosity. It helps to build that relationship with the learners. And it could just be for general classroom management. Which page are we on? Who's your partner? Which exercise are you completing? Things like that. We, as teachers, ask between 300 and 400 questions in a day. So Obviously, you're not going to plan all of them, but it is important to consider these things for a good proportion of them in order that the learners maximise their benefits. So other things to consider. Try to minimise the number of closed questions you ask. Obviously, you need to ask these kind of yes/no questions when you're concept checking, because you want quick answers, or when you're encouraging weaker learners to build up their confidence. But the vast majority of the questions you ask should be more open ones or requiring specific answers. Try to use a balance of types of questions, so your concept check questions and your open questions, maybe a couple of yes/no questions, but use a range so that you can gauge a better idea of the learner's knowledge and abilities. Use open questions to encourage learner contributions, because that helps them to become more confident. It can also help you to assess regularly how they're progressing and what they can and can't do. Try to avoid asking questions on trivial content. So stick to key, important questions that you want to direct learners' attention to, rather than just little things that aren't so important. It's really important to grade your language. So think about what learners know and don't know, and pitch your questions just slightly above their level to challenge them that real slight amount. But ensure that learners can understand the gist of your questions and they understand your instructions, because if they don't understand, you need to tone it down a little bit. Try to avoid paraphrasing too much, because that makes the question too lengthy. Okay, try and get straight to the point. If you can, it's a good idea to personalise the questions, to make it relevant to the learners, so that it's easier for them to understand and easier for them to get their heads around the concept. Try to avoid questions that contain the answer. So, for example, if you're asking a learner, where do you park your car? Well, the answer is a car park. It's a little too easy. Yeah. What else? Ensure the learners can understand the questions clearly, because if they don't, how can they answer your question? Ask questions randomly around the room rather than going around in a specific order, because if learners can anticipate that you're about to ask them something next, they'll wake up and listen. Whereas if they don't know when you're going to pounce on them, they will always be alert, hopefully. Try to have a mix of open class questions where you direct a question to the whole class, as well as ones that you direct to specific learners. You do need to have open class questions to get a general idea of who knows what, particularly if you're trying to see what learners already know about a topic before you teach it to them. But it's really important also to see what specific learners know or don't know, especially after you've already taught something, or when you're getting feedback on answers. Give learners time to answer after you've asked them a question. Don't expect them to be able to produce the answer immediately. Very often they need to think about how they're going to phrase their answer. So they're not just coming out with some mumbo jumbo that they're, giving you a coherent answer. And perhaps they need to calculate something or work something out before they're able to give you that answer. So give them time before you pounce on them. Try to anticipate their answers. This is quite important because when you're thinking about what questions you're going to ask, if you can anticipate how they might answer, it might help you to come up with a follow-up question that's suitable, or, you know, maybe recognize that certain questions might not be suitable for certain learners. So really do think about that. When learners have given you an answer to a question, it's always good to think about how you're going to respond appropriately in order to correct them if they've made a mistake, or if they've not given you enough of an answer, how you're going to follow up your question with another question to elicit more information, to get a slightly lengthier answer. Finally, avoid correcting a learner before you elicit the answer from others. So what I mean is, if a learner gives you an answer to a question and it's not right, don't just go in there and say, no, the answer is whatever. Ask other learners, what do you think? Do you agree? And then once you've got a couple of responses from others, then you can give the correct response. It encourages more peer support, and it also encourages learners to listen to each other for answers rather than just relying on the teacher. Try to avoid over-eliciting as well when you're trying to determine what they already know. So if you're trying to ask too many questions and they clearly don't know much about the topic, you're not going to get very far. So just a few general questions to see what they already know. If they do seem to know stuff, then yes, elicit more. But if they don't know much, don't force it. When you're eliciting new language or new concepts, try to use familiar examples, examples that are everyday examples, or ones that are familiar to learners' situations, because that will help them to get their heads around it quicker and more effectively. Avoid asking questions like, do you understand? Or is that clear? Because 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. And it might not be clear. They might start the activity and then it transpires that they actually didn't understand because they're doing the wrong thing. So use concept check questions like, which task are we doing? Which question do you answer first? Who is your partner? Things like that, to make sure that they have really understood. And finally, effective questioning is an art that takes a lot of practice. Even the most experienced teachers can always work on evolving and improving their eliciting and questioning techniques. So if you try a new question type, or if you make attempts to improve your practice, but it's not working so well, don't beat yourself up. Take time to practice, keep practicing, you will get better. I hope that's helped you. Thank you for watching.